So the basic foundation of project management is scope, time, and cost, right?
Mm.
And
Yes.
we've seen how they are interrelated, and they are what we call the triple constraint: scope, time, and cost, right? So now let's look at the example I gave, right? I said if you're traveling from Lagos to Ibadan, that's your scope. We said it's going to take you how much time? It's going to take you 1.5 hours if you're going through Lagos Ibadan Expressway, and it should cost us about, let's say, 15,000, right? Now, I want to introduce a scenario. So we're traveling from Lagos to Ibadan through Lagos Ibadan Expressway. I hope you can still remember. Traveling from Lagos to
Yes, I do.
Ibadan. Okay. So we're traveling from Lagos to Ibadan through Lagos Ibadan Expressway on the first Friday of the month at 4 p.m. So will things still stay the same in terms of time and cost?
No, because of I think the programs that go on that road.
Exactly, like the RCCG program. So
Mhm.
that means that time, because of traffic, time may go up to, say, even 4 hours, and cost, you probably want to buy more fuel, maybe 20,000, right? Because you're going to be burning more fuel on the spot. Some people eventually turn off the AC. So I introduced something that caused time and cost. In fact, we can even change the scope. And what did I introduce? It's called risk. Now, risk has the power, and of course, look at where risk is, has the power to change scope, time, and cost. It can also impact on quality, right? So this diagram is called the enhanced triple constraint. Not only do we see the triple constraint, we also see risk. I think there's something missing here. The enhanced triple constraint contains customer satisfaction, which you can also say stakeholder satisfaction, satisfaction, right? Which is stakeholders. And in some books, you could also have resources here, somewhere around here, right? So this is called the enhanced triple constraint. And if you look at this, you find out that it's closer to the 10 knowledge areas, because we don't just have scope, time, cost, quality. Now we have risk, resources, and customer satisfaction is the same thing as stakeholder satisfaction in a way. So that means we are seeing more of the 10 knowledge areas, even though they are not really up to 10 when you count them. But this diagram is called enhanced triple constraint, which looks at more factors that can influence your project, right? And this is what we're saying, the enhanced triple constraint. Okay. So let's move on and look at the, you know, 5 process groups. Now, if you look at the 5 process groups, you'll find out, let's list them. We have initiating, we have planning, we have executing, we have monitoring and controlling, and we finally end up with closing, right? Now, the way we have introduced them, you might think they are all sequential. That means when you finish initiating, you start planning When you finish planning, you start executing. When you finish executing, you start monitoring and controlling. When you finish monitoring and controlling, you close. This is not exactly how projects run. It's not linear. And the only person that can manage a project end to end like this in a linear fashion is only God, because God knows closing before he starts initiating the project. So for God, it's a straightway journey, straight. But in reality, the way we manage projects, it's more of a cyclical process than a linear process. Now, what do I mean by cyclical? Now, that's the diagram I showed you at first. So if you look at when it comes to initiating a project, it's quite straightforward. But when it comes to planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, in fact, monitoring and controlling is done throughout our project, right? You find out that 3 of them are cyclical, closing is straightforward. So out of the 5 stages or 5 process groups, just initiating and closing are straightforward, while planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling can be considered cyclical. Now, why do our projects run this way? Now, let's study the 5 process groups in this diagram. And what happens is that we start the project, we do initiation, right? Then we plan the project to the best of our ability. We plan the project to the best of our ability. Then we start executing the project. But of course, when we're executing a project, things happen, things change. Now, when changes happen, we have to ensure that we can still align with the project objectives, right? When things happen, we try to make adjustments so that we can still align with the project objectives, right? So take, for example, it's a building project and the sponsor comes to inspect and they want to make change in a part of the construction project. Now, that wasn't the original plan. So monitoring and controlling steps in and says, okay, if you want to make a change, what do you do? And sometimes it's not just the customer requesting for a change. Sometimes we just notice there's a deviation. So it could be caused by a customer requesting for a change, or we notice that we're not really aligning with the scope of project or something. Then we have to go back. Monitoring and controlling says go back and do an impact analysis, go back to the drawing and look at how we can accommodate that change. So that means revise our plan. And once we have revised the plan, then we come back and then we start executing the revised plan. So take, for example, a customer is building a house and the customer says that, look, I want the living room to be bigger, right? And just imagine it's a project in Nigeria also, and the customer is saying they want the living room to be bigger, right? Now, of course, for that to happen, and they've already started building, maybe they've just done the foundation and they're about to start raising the blocks, raise the blocks. So the architect, having received that request, will go back to his design and see how we can make space. So he has to go back to planning and redesign. He has to look for how to make space, right, to accommodate the customer's request. So he has to redesign, and then when he has redesigned and gotten approval, then they now start laying the blocks now in a way that makes the living room bigger. And it might not end there. Several changes may come up. And anytime there's a variance or deviation from the original plan of the project, we're going to stop. Monitoring and controlling will make us to stop, because monitoring and controlling means that we're constantly checking our progress, we're constantly checking the performance of the project to ensure that it still aligns with project objectives. We're constantly ensuring that what we are doing is in line with plan. Monitoring and controlling can also help us to make adjustments to our plan anytime a change is requested. So anytime we need to make changes to the project, monitoring and controlling says go back and replan the project based on the change that's happened and then continue. So it could even be that things of the quotation that we're working with for the project, it could even be that the prices have changed, and then we have to go and rebudget. Rebudgeting is part of planning. We have to now rebudget, and then based on the new prices of things, look at how we can continue the project, maybe by adding additional budget. So there's this constant back and forth movement between planning and executing in a project, because things change even when we start a project. So we have to keep on making adjustments to the plan. And then when we have completed the project, we are going to start closing the project, right? When we complete the project, when we have completed the project, we just jump out of the loop and start closing the project. And this is basically what happens on projects. There's usually a constant you've planned the project, you start executing, then there's a change, you need to go back and replan to accommodate the change, then you continue executing. And the question is, what causes this? What causes the back and forth movement between planning and executing, right? Sometimes it's because we need to accommodate changes. That's one. Another is called progressive elaboration, and we talked about this last week. And I said that progressive elaboration is the concept where we elaborate the plan of the project, right, based on things we discover. So as we start a project, it's possible that when we planned, we didn't know that there were certain things that we did not know. And then when we start executing a project, we now start discovering, and then we have to elaborate the project plan. That can also cause the cyclical movement of planning and executing. So that is what happens. And then we close the project once we've achieved the project's deliverables. So let's look at what happens, right, in initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So in the initiating process or process group, what we hope to achieve is to be able to create the project charter and identify stakeholders. That's creating the stakeholder register. Now, that means that in the initiating process or initiating stage of the project, there are two major things you want to do. You want to create the project charter. That's one thing. The second thing you want to do is that you want to identify stakeholders, right? You want to identify stakeholders. That is how you initiate the project. I remember there was a time I went for an interview, and in that interview, I was interviewing for a project management job, and the person asked me, "How do you initiate a project?" And I smiled. "Are you asking me project initiation?" "Yes, I teach this a lot. How do you initiate a project?" So confidently, I said, in order to initiate a project, you create the project charter and identify stakeholders. And you can see it, right? And I confidently say that. So when I said that, the person interviewing me shook her head and said, she shook her head in disapproval. I was like, "Are you talking about project initiation?" Then I'd been PMP for 3 years. I've been training for 3 years. And said, "Yes. How do you initiate a project?" Now, I came with PMI and said, according to the project management body of knowledge, to initiate a project, you create the project charter and identify stakeholders, create the stakeholder register. So when she saw that I came with the whole of PMI, right, to the PM box standard, she now said, "What about proposals?" Now, it was then I realized that the person interviewing me, they don't know so much about project management because she was using the wrong terms. That's when I just knew that this person doesn't know project management, and it's okay, right? And of course, you. So what she said, "What about proposals?" And I was like, "What do you mean proposals?" And then she said, uh, "How do you secure contracts for our company?" So when she now said that, I now understood what she was saying. She was saying that, how will I go and market the company's goods and services? How will I market the company's goods and services so that the company can get jobs, right? So she was talking about initiating a project by selling, and that's a different focus entirely. That's a marketing job. That's a sales job, right? Of course, yes, a project manager can do it, but we don't call it initiating. And that's the thing. So it's a sales function. Trying to sell proposals is not, she was calling it initiating. How do you initiate a project? No. In project management, initiating a project means you're creating the project charter, which is a brief summary of the project, and identifying all the stakeholders. That's how you start a project. So that is initiating. That's what happens in initiating. Planning processes. So what happens in planning? What happens in planning? So in planning, this is where we plan across the 10 knowledge areas to create the overall project management plan. So by the time we finish planning, we have planned around the 10 knowledge areas. We've looked at several ways of achieving the objectives of the project, and we have put together a plan from reflecting the 10 knowledge areas, and the overall plan is called the project management plan. Now, what this means is that.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. All right. So what this means is that during planning, we're going to plan across scope. We're going to plan the schedule. We're going to plan the budget, which is cost. We're going to plan the quality standards, which is quality. We're going to plan resources. We're going to plan So your planning processes involves you planning across the 10 knowledge areas. And the overall document we create is the project management plan. And the project management plan has subsidiary plans, like the scope management plan is part of the project management plan. The schedule management plan is part of the project management plan, and all the plans we create. So that's a summary of what happens in planning. We are creating plans across the 10 knowledge areas, which is our roadmap of what we're going to do in those areas. Then, once our project management plan is completed, then we can go into the executing processes. And executing is where we coordinate people and other resources to carry out the plan. That's the project plan. And this is where we start creating work results and deliverables. Work results could be progress reports, status reports, and then we can also create deliverables, right? That's start creating what the project is meant to deliver to the customer. In monitoring and controlling, right, this is where we measure, this is where we ensure that project objectives are met by monitoring and measuring progress regularly to identify variances from plan so that corrective action can be taken when necessary. So this is where we check what has happened in the project. We measure performance or progress regularly to check if we're still in line with our plans. And if things have changed, we want to make a correction. So let me give a simple example. So let's say that we notice that we spent more than what we plan to spend. So let's say that based on where you are in the project, you're meant to have spent 2 million Canadian dollars, right? But what we've actually spent is 2.2 million Canadian dollars. So what is our plan? 2 million Canadian dollars. What have we done? 2.2 Canadian dollars. What does monitoring and controlling do? Okay, we look at ways where we can correct that. So for example, we might try to find a way on how we can reduce the resources, maybe cut down on cost in the project so that we can still finish the project with the same budget. So monitoring and controlling is where we constantly ensure that we are monitoring the progress of the project to ensure that we align with project objectives and manage the variation. The same thing can happen to schedule. Let's say that we are in the third phase of the project, and according to our schedule, the third phase should have taken us 6 months, but we spent 7 months, right? That's a variation to the plan. We should have completed the third phase in 6 months, but we have exceeded that by 1 month. That's what's actually happened. Monitoring and controlling will look at the rest of the project to see how we can make up for the lost time. And this might include adding more resources, right? Trying to do work at the same time. I'm just trying to give you different scenarios of what monitoring and controlling means. It means that we have to go back and replan on how we can still meet up with project objectives anytime we experience variances from plan. So that's why monitoring and controlling ends with corrective actions. So we're trying to correct what has happened. Now, let me say something. Monitoring and controlling is not only for corrective actions, it's also known for preventive actions. Let me use the red color. It's also known for preventive actions and something we call defect repair. Defect repair is is where we produce a product and that product has to be repaired because some features in the product are not working as they should. So monitoring and controlling ends in one of these three things: corrective actions, preventive actions, and defect repairs. Corrective actions means something has happened and we need to correct it. Just the two incidents, two cases I just mentioned, and that's in the first one, we spent more than we planned. In the second one, we took more time than we planned. So how do we solve that problem? We need to correct. That's corrective. Preventive actions are a bit different. Preventive actions is where, by monitoring progress, we realize that we're going to end up spending more money. So looking at how we're spending money, we have not overspent yet, but based on our progress monitoring of cost, we have realized that we're going to spend more money. So we now come up with preventive actions, which means the problem hasn't happened, but we're already getting ready to do things to prevent us going over budget. Defect repairs is only used when you have built a product, right? You built a product and that product has issues and you want to repair those issues after you've built it. So let's say you're building maybe a remote control as part of the deliverables of the project, and we notice that the remote control has some issues with the buttons. Then the next thing is, after inspecting, then we go ahead with defect repairs to make adjustments to ensure the product is repaired and can achieve what it was designed to make. So all of these happen in monitoring and controlling, and this is where we try to redirect the project to achieve what we originally intended it to achieve and to also accommodate changes. Last but not the least is closing. And of course, this is where the final deliverable of the project is handed over to the customer or to operations, as the case may be, right? Either hand over to the customer or customer or to operations, and then we close the project. But let me add something here. Now, I'm just going to add one more statement, and that is we close the project when it either finishes or stops. So why am I adding this statement? I want us to understand what closing is. Closing is different from finishing a project. And finishing a project is different from closing a project. I can finish a project and it's possible I don't close it, right? I can stop a project and it's possible I don't close the project. So what's the difference between these three? Can I call them verbs? Yes, I think I can call them verbs. Closing, finishing, stopping. Closing, finishing, stopping. So let me start with finishing, which is what we expect. So you finish the project, and finishing a project means that we achieve the deliverable. So if it's a house you're building, finishing means that we finish the housing project, right? Finishing means that we finished the housing project, and that's what it means. Now, so what happens in closing is that when we close a project, we archive project documents into repositories or databases in our organization, repositories. That means the information, the report of that project is stored somewhere in your organization. The plans, the document, all the documents that represent a project are archived. That is the real activity behind closing a project. So that means that if I finish a project and I don't archive project documents, right? I don't archive the plans, the reports, the acceptance letter. I don't archive all this. It means I just finished the project. I didn't close it, right? Let's go to when a project stops. What does it mean that a project stops? Of course, stopping a project means that you have chosen not to continue the project, and projects stop for many reasons. Sometimes it's no longer in line with the strategic objectives of the organization. It's no longer in line. Or sometimes we stop a project because there's better technology. So just imagine if you still remember the era of analog phones, if you still remember the era, right, about maybe 25, 26 years ago, before we got GSM, right, phones in Nigeria, analog was what we were using. Everybody had a phone box, right? So imagine that a company is trying to, they're building their headquarters and they want to put phone boxes in each office, right? And of course, imagine that project is ongoing and then all of a sudden GSM technology comes out and they just say, look, why are we spending so much money wiring the building? Let's go for newer technology, and they stop the project. So project stops when you choose to abandon the project, or a project can stop maybe because the customer ran out of funds, the sponsor does not have funds anymore, and so the project is now, I think this is what they call white elephant project, where the 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 the, the customer or sponsor doesn't have money anymore, or even the government, the project has become so expensive that they just decide to hand off, stop the project. So when a project stops, you also have to close it. And what does closing mean? It means we archive project documents based on what happened right up to the point where the project stopped, and you archive it into repositories, right? So that's how you close a project that stops. Now, why is this important? Why don't we just say, oh, we've abandoned the project, let's leave it, let's just leave the project. Or we finished the project, the customers received their deliverable, let's just move on, let's just move on. So let's look at what happened in Nigeria in the first, after President Obasanjo, or should I say during President Obasanjo's, I think his second term, or after, or first term. In the first term, Nigeria worked on a $16 billion power project, right? So there was actually a project announced where the president started a $16 billion power project. Now, after he left office, people kept what happened to our $16 billion power project. Why? Because the goal of that project was to ensure there was uninterrupted power supply by the end of the project. In fact, our former late president, I'm talking about Buhari, had a discussion with him, and he asked what happened to our $16 billion project. So it was public knowledge. Now, obviously, since he was no longer the president, and we all knew about it, but we did not see the end deliverable, we can assume that the project was abandoned, right? We can assume that the project was stopped. Now, why do we need to close the project? If the project was properly documented, another government can come and look at where they stopped, because there are records to show what happened and where they stopped. And they may decide that, oh, this project is almost complete. We just need like $5 billion, raise the $5 billion and complete the project. But it became obvious, if two presidents are asking, one of them is asking what happened to our $16 billion project, it means that the project was not properly closed, because all the documents should be able to reflect what happened. And so even though some machines and equipment were bought, nobody had information about them. Some of these equipments would have probably decomposed on, they probably, what's the word? Rust could have actually destroyed the equipment, and all because nobody knew what really happened in the project. The project was not properly closed. So even when your project stops, you can close it. You can archive project documents, so that if another management or another sponsor wants to take over the project, they don't have to guess. They can look at the project documents and know what they need to do to continue it, right? And this is according to best practices. Anytime you close a project, the reports of that project should be, the documents that represent that project should be available for the next 10 years. And on a global stage, if the project is done on a global stage, those documents should be available for the next 25 years. So that is really what we mean by closing a project. It is archiving project documents, right? Lessons learned that help us to know what happened in the project, right? And this is why, this is part of project management best practices. This is why if there are a lot of abandoned projects and we don't close them, it's likely that we're going to continue that cycle of, recycling projects. We're just going to be, the project will end, no formal documents archived. Then the government later will start another project. There's no document to reflect on, and the cycle goes on and on. Okay. All right. Please, do we have any questions? Is it clear? Do you have any questions? Is it clear?
It is clear. No questions from my end.
Okay.
No question at the moment. Thank you.
All right. So this is how we go through the process groups. So we're going to look at the different positions that we have in project management, the key roles. So starting with the project manager, of course, the key focus of project manager is why we're doing the course, and is the primary role of discussion for this course. And the general viewpoint of the project manager involves communication with all others and the integration of activities with all others as needed. So, of course, you can see two major things here. Number one, the project manager needs to be able to communicate with all stakeholders and also ensure that there's an integration of all the project activities, ensuring that the project runs smoothly and seamlessly, right? That's it. These are two major responsibilities of the project manager, right? Communication and integration. Don't forget, approximately 90% of a project manager's job is communication. So the project manager describes to team members what activities need to be done according to the plan. In fact, they can also plan with team members and often lead the team members into executing a plan. The project manager maintains scope control of the project. Now, why does the project manager need to maintain scope? What happens when scope is not properly managed? What happens when scope is not properly managed in a project in light of the triple constraints? If scope is being mismanaged, what happens to time and cost? Can someone help me? If scope is not properly managed, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it affects the time and cost. Maybe spending more time or even spending more money in achieving or completing the project, which will cause a imbalance in the whole project.
Thank you so much. That's it. Do you know that scope management can also lead to project failure? And how that happens is that you keep accommodating more scope changes. And if you keep doing that, you run out of time and budget, right? And that's how scope creep, it's called scope creep. When we don't control the scope of our project, it can lead us to running out of money or running out of time. This is what happened to the Ajaokuta steel rolling mill in the 70s, early 70s, right? Where they planned to create a steel rolling mill, right? But what happened is that scope creep, there was a change in government, and then they wanted to first of all create a steel rolling mill, then it became a city. And so scope kept on changing, different stakeholders. Nobody was there to manage the scope of the project. And it just got, this is what we call white elephant project, where the scope of the project becomes so big, it now becomes unrealistic to fund. And that is, it's a job of the project manager to maintain scope control, right? Especially when stakeholders are trying to suggest new things in the project. Once the scope has been planned, right, we follow the scope. We even reject scope changes if it's not coming from the sponsor. As much as possible, your job as a project manager is to control the scope of your project. Then we talk about communicating project status as it evolves. Communicating project status as it evolves. So remember, 90% of a project manager's job is communication. And the project manager is the person in charge of planning and executing the goals of a charter. So these are the responsibilities of a project manager. More of communication, integration, right? And you can see their job is to plan and execute based on the project charter and drive the project. So that's our project manager. That's what the role you'll be playing on some projects, right? Especially the ones you're going to be handling. All right, let's take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll talk about other roles that we'll find in projects. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break. Come back afterwards. So when we look at the project management team, the project management team member is anyone on your team who's working on project management related items. Anyone on your team working on project management related items. So what we need to notice is this. There's something called the project management team members. So we have project management team members, and we also have what we call project team members without the management. So what's the difference? The difference is that the project team members are the people we hire majorly for executing the project. Now, without project team members, you can't execute your project. So let me give you, so from the point of, in terms of construction, your project team members are going to be made up of the bricklayers, the electricians, the carpenters, all the people that are going to the trades, the skills that you need to execute the project are largely what we consider the project team members. While when we talk about project management team members, we're referring to people like supervisors in your project or team leads or what we call project coordinators and project expediters and project coordinators and project expediters. I think it's XP. Yeah. So we also have this. So the project management team is quite different from project team members. So when you're talking about team members, we're focusing on those people that will carry out the plan to execute your project. And these are the people that build things in your project. So, for example, in software development, your project team members will be made up of developers, software developers, testers, and even business analysts. They form the project team members. Without them, there's no software, right? And I've given you from the point of view of construction. Without the bricklayer, so that is what so there's a difference between your project management team and your project team members, right? And the project management team member is anyone on the team who's working on project management related items. So, which means that we're talking about things like planning, people that help us in planning, coordinating, monitoring and controlling, overseeing execution. Those are the project management team members. While project team members are those that just follow the plan. They are the people we oversee in executing the project. Now, I mentioned two roles that are that you need to know, and that is the project coordinator and project expediter. Expediter and coordinator, right? So what are these two roles? Now, first of all, when do we see project coordinator or expediter? So let's look at the instances we can find them. So number one instance where you can find project coordinators and expediter is when the organization structure does not support a full-scale project. Now, what does this mean? When the organization structure doesn't support a full-scale project, instead of hiring a project manager, you can hire a project coordinator or expediter. In other words, we're talking about the functional organization structure. That's the one where, projects are not a priority and the organization structure is not geared towards project. You can get a project coordinator instead of a project manager. That's what we're saying. The second instance, you can find project coordinators and expediter is when they are used to support the project manager, which means they can be part of the project management team. Now, in some organizations, they call project coordinators junior PM, that's junior project manager, and that's because it's a supportive role, right? So what does the project coordinator do? They assist the project manager. They, do sometimes do project documentation. So let's say you're a project coordinator. The project manager can say, okay, help me create this document. Help me create this document. So they can say, help me create a RACI chart, and they assist the project manager, right? They assist the project manager. So you could have an instance where you are managing a project, and then you have a project coordinator, expediter, and usually this happens on very large projects. Now, let's look at their function. What do they do, right? Now, their function is to serve, apart from assisting the project manager, they serve as communication link to senior management. What this means is that project coordinators and expediters can get information about what is going on in projects and help to present that information in dashboards, right? They help senior management to know what is going on across different projects. So they help to source that information and help to create dashboards so that the senior management can know what is going on in different projects across the organization. Now, in the UK, a project coordinator is known as a PMO analyst. So the equivalent of this job in the UK, that's a project coordinator role, is a PMO analyst, which means they work sometimes in the PMO, and that's one of their responsibilities. Now, what's the difference? Because we're talking about two roles here. The difference is that the project coordinator the project coordinator has some decision-making abilities. While the project expediter has none. Has none. Just like that. All right. So, Sean, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned that these people serve as communication link to the senior management. And
Yeah.
I was just surprised because I thought they are supporting the project manager. Is it that the project expediter or coordinator have a better they are more how do I say? I was thinking that based on the fact that they are supporting, so it's more like they're reporting to the project manager. But if they are serving as communication link to the senior management, does that mean their role is higher?
No, no. So imagine you are the chef in a kitchen. You are the chef, right? And you have customers that want food. So you are going to talk to, your team and say, look, go and get the plates, serve that customer that food. So the people that run around for that information, the project manager is trying to manage one project or the other, sitting down to start getting information is a lot of work, which is not very productive for a project manager to gather. Do you get what I'm saying? For the sake of presentation. Now, it doesn't mean that the project manager doesn't interface with senior management. Of course, senior management might need to know what's going on. But we're talking about presenting the information, just creating a dashboard of knowing, okay, how much has been spent in this project, when did the project start, when is the project, just information that you don't even need to present, right? That's what the project coordinator is like. Going to fetch glasses that you're going to serve. The chef doesn't have to do that. I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
Yes, I do now. I understand it now. So they
Uh-huh.
are the ones presenting just information, helping with presenting what is going on so far.
Yeah,
Not necessarily because they have all right.
yeah. They're the ones fetching
Okay.
the information, right? They're just fetching the information. It's not as if they're in control. They're just gathering the information, just like the chef can ask people to get the plate, serve the customer, right? While they focus on the um, the job of making sure the meals are well cooked. So that's what the project coordinator. It's a more or less like a junior role, right? So they fetch the information and create dashboards that senior management can now see what's going on. It doesn't really mean they present the information. Okay, so that's that. All right, let's continue and talk about the customer. Who is the customer? The customer or user is the person or group that will make use of the work of the project. The customer or user is the person or group that will make use of the work of the project. The customer can also be considered as the owner of the work, and the user can be concerned as the end person or group using the work, right? So we have customer and user, right? Customer and user. So let's move on. And let's talk about the sponsor. Now, the word sponsor is something that is not strange. It's something we can relate with. And the sponsor is either a person or a group who has secured funding for the project, right? It could be a senior manager within the organization. It could be a department that has secured funding. The sponsor is whoever has the cash for the project. The sponsor is accountable to creating a project charter. And if you look at the word, I'm saying accountable, which means they are meant to ensure the project charter is created. Now, they are not necessarily responsible. And the reason why I'm using accountable and responsible is because they have to ensure it is created, but they don't have to do it themselves. That's what I'm saying. So in an organization, senior management can just say, look, this is what we are doing. And then the project manager now starts helping to develop the project charter. So usually the project, the senior management is accountable for ensuring that the project charter is created, but they don't really have to do it themselves. And so they can assign a project manager to help develop the project charter. The sponsor is responsible for signing off when the project is complete. So when the goals of the charter are met, the sponsor is the person that signs off and approves or accepts the project. The project manager manages the expectations of the sponsor and secures the sign-off signature so that the project team can move on to other projects. Now, what does this mean? Without sign-off, your team is stuck on that project. And yes, I'm using the word stuck. When a project has not been signed off, that means that the customer or the sponsor has not accepted the deliverables. And until they accept deliverables, you are going to be stuck on that project, right? So it is the sponsor that signs off when the project is complete. It is the customer that signs off when the project is complete. All right. So the project manager consults the sponsor for approval on changes to the project that could impact the charter. So the charter is a high-level plan. During the project, if things start changing, right, the project manager may consult the sponsor if it affects the goals of the project charter. For example, if the project is going to need funding more than what was initially documented in the project charter, of course, you need to consult the sponsor. Now, the sponsor can sometimes be referred to as senior management, but typically, senior management is the management that works for the sponsor and helps accomplish the goals of the company. So, what do we mean by senior management can be called the sponsor? Now, let's look at this situation. So, let's say that we have, this scenario, right? So, let's say Access Bank wants KPMG to do some research for them as regarding a product they want to launch, a financial product they want KPMG to do the research for them. So Access Bank is going to be the sponsor of the project, while senior management of KPMG is going to, provide oversight for that project, right? They're going to provide oversight to that project. So in this case, when we look at it, the senior management of KPMG is working for the sponsor. But when can we talk about senior management being called the sponsor? Now, this comes when the organization is working on internal projects, right? That means within KPMG, they're working on their own internal projects. So maybe they're creating new services or creating new consulting services or something. So for internal projects, senior management is going to be sponsor because they approve the funding and secure finance for internal projects. So for internal projects, senior management can be considered the sponsor, right? Generally, they can be considered the sponsor, or it could even be just a senior manager that secured funding for the project. So what we're saying is that senior management can be considered sponsors when they finance internal projects. All right, so let's talk about senior management. And when you look at senior management, they are top level management in any organization, and they determine the strategic dimension of the organization. And when we talk about strategy, we're talking about long-term plans. So which makes senior management in a good position to help to coordinate and prioritize projects in an organization. Now, how do they do that? Senior management determines the long-term plans of an organization. And based on those plans, they can help to prioritize and say, concerning our strategic objective, project A is more important than B. So when it comes to prioritizing projects, senior management can help in prioritization because they determine the strategic vision of the organization. And of course, any project, we can prioritize projects on that strategic vision from senior management. Now, we also have what we call the senior management focus, which is on my right. And in senior management focus, we're looking at two levels of an organization. And let me just draw this pyramid. Right. So we have one level, another level. And so when we refer to senior management, we're talking to the top level of management in any organization. When we now have what we call middle level management, and that's where you have functional management, project management, and operations management. And then you have operations, and those are people that run day-to-day operations. So we have top level management, middle level management, and operations, day-to-day running of business activities. The goal of senior management is strategic, long-term. The goal of middle level management is tactical, short-term. The goal of operations is achieving your daily goals, daily KPIs. So what's the difference in scope between senior management and tactical management? So whereas senior management has 3 to 5 year plans in view, tactical management has anything between 3 months to 2 years. In other words, for us to achieve our strategic plans, we have to execute a number of tactical plans to achieve the strategic plans. This is why in any organization, middle level management is very, very key in achieving the goals of the organization. And it's in middle level management we find project management and operations or functional management. And when you look at this diagram, you're going to see, and so this diagram translates to this one, and you see some of the challenges between the different levels of management. So the project manager or project management's goal is to achieve project objectives, project priorities, creating a new product, service, or result. That's the goal of project management. Functional management or operations management goal is to maintain day-to-day business performance, right? Making sure operations are running smoothly. Now, they have conflict over priorities, and the conflict also comes because they need resources for their priorities. So the project manager needs people to help them carry out project goals. The functional manager needs people to carry day-to-day operational goals. Where the conflict comes in is that they have to share resources. Now, that means that the project manager does not necessarily have their own unique resources for projects. But what usually happens is that they go and borrow resources from the departments. And we saw that in the matrix diagram during the organization structures. You saw that the project manager borrows resources across departments to form their teams. The issue is that sometimes functional managers may not, it's possible they don't have enough resources within their departments to even release for projects. And so that's where the conflict comes in. And so senior management, we can now escalate those conflicts, especially when it comes to resources, and they can come up with resolution when the two arms are, have conflict over resources in an organization. And it usually happens where someone from a department has been assigned on a project. The department head is maybe 2 or 3 staff on leave, and it doesn't have many resources. Is usually going to raise an issue about that. So that is the problem here, and escalation can be done to senior management. Right. So the functional manager is more or less the head of a department, and this is someone that runs either a department or a business division, and they're not super excited when project managers are requesting resources to work on projects that do not necessarily involve their department. So an example of a functional manager is the manager of the accounting department in an organization, right? So let's move on. Now, when we talk about project team members, we're talking about, anyone who's involved in executing a project, right? And project team members usually factor cost into the project because we have to pay them to do the work. So anyone involved in doing the actual work of building what the project involves is a project team member. Okay. So let's talk about performing organization and influencers, project influencers. So performing organization is the company or division of a company that is doing the work of the project. In the case of Access Bank and KPMG, the performing organization will be KPMG. The influencer is a person or group indirectly related to a project who can have a negative or positive influence on it. The influencer is a person or group who can have a negative or positive influence on. All right, so that is examples of influencers. So influencers are people that can influence your project. In Lagos, if you are building a house, you see influencers. We call them omonile. They are not there when you bought the house or bought the property, but they come to disturb you when you're building your house. They are influencers. Government agencies can also act as influencers when they come up with policies that influence your project. They're also influencers. So any person or group indirectly related to your project who can have a negative or positive influence on it are called influencers. And this is about the time we have. In fact, I've exceeded by 1 minute, which I do apologize. So we can call it a day. So I'm going to stop recording.